The Cosmic Briefing, hosted by award-winning author Dr. Allison Brown, opens the door to disclosure, consciousness, galactic history, and humanity's awakening.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cosmic Briefing. Today I wanted to talk about an interview with a woman by the name of Julia Mossbridge that I happened upon on my YouTube feed. And I noticed that she is making the rounds. She was recently on Joe Rogan. She's been on some other people's podcasts doing some interviews. Her last book came out in November, so I'm not sure why all of a sudden now she's coming into the mainstream or resurfacing again. But some of the things she talked about are right up my alley, and some of the things that I have been communicating with you all here on this podcast. And so I wanted to go over a few of those things to reinforce the ideas that she's talking about and how they relate to disclosure, to consciousness, to intuition, to all of that sort of stuff. Her name is Julia Mossbridge. She is a cognitive neuroscientist. She studies intuition and consciousness, psi abilities, and superhuman potential. She talks about her own experience as a child in a middle school and being studied for her own psychic abilities. I'm not going to get into that in too great length, but you can watch any of her interviews and find out her background. But one of the concepts that I noticed in the interview that I watched today was this idea that disclosure comes from within. And I have said that a lot. She actually mentioned it early on in the interview that I saw, and I just stopped. I was like, wait. I say that. And I listened even more intently because I wanted to hear how she used that phrase and what she meant by it. And so she expanded a bit to say that awakening begins not with external revelation, but with inner truth. And I just spoke about that sort of thing in a recent podcast here, where I said that your external reality is actually a reflection of your internal reality. And that's essentially what she is saying. But she's expanding that into not only disclosure and perception, but also the awakening process itself, which was really neat. So she talked about this experimentation that was happening to her in what she called the SOAR program for gifted children when she was in 7th grade. And she goes on in great detail to talk about some of the things that they may have been studying with her. And the thing about that is, as she has dived more into her own history, she's noticed what I would call concept number 2. And that is that in the greater perspective of things, there is no victim and perpetrator narrative. She understands that back then, when she was a child, she understood herself as the victim and she played that role. But now, when she looks back at it, people have asked her, do you think this was a conspiracy? Like, what government agency was doing this, and why, and what were they looking for, and who was it, and why did they do this, and why did they pick you? All of those kinds of questions can lead us into what we might call a conspiracy narrative. And she said, in some of the things that she described, was it a coincidence or was it a conspiracy? And she said, rather than taking that either-or approach and thinking of it in terms of a conspiracy, she calls it an inspiracy. Now, this is really neat. And again, this is her terminology. I didn't make this up. I didn't create this. But she says an inspiracy means that no matter if it was an experience that we might label as bad or nefarious or a conspiracy, that it can be inspirational, that it can actually lead to what she calls a redemptive or a redemption narrative. The experience that she used to illustrate that point was that she was raised by 2 parents, and her dad was had OCD. And I think she said he worked for the Department of Energy, which might be why she was selected for the experimentation. But at any rate, he had OCD. And the OCD didn't just affect himself. He was able to see what he thought were flaws in other people, namely she and her sister. And so one of the things he was obsessed about was teeth and imperfection in the mouths of his children. And so she explained that he would spend many, many minutes, 45 minutes, 90 minutes each night flossing his children's teeth when they were young. And he recorded it, auto-recorded it, back in the day when we didn't have video recorders everywhere. He recorded it on audio, and she found a recording of this. And what she said was that when she listened to the recording, and she said she didn't really feel it as abusive, but she recognizes that it was abuse now. But she said that when she listened to the recording, she heard herself saying, "Daddy, you already flossed that tooth." And yet he still would continue to floss over and over and over again. And she would say again, "Daddy, you already flossed that tooth." It didn't stop him in the moment, but she realized when she went back and listened to that, and when she discovered that tape, that she stood up for herself. And so now she can look back on that experience not with pain and anguish or anger at her father for doing this to her, but with compassion and understanding and inspiration and redemption and forgiveness and all of those types of things, because she was standing up for herself. She was actually learning that skill, and she was honing that skill as a child so that when she became an adult, it was a stronger skill for her to be able to advocate for herself and speak up. And so how this relates to what I have taught before and what I understand in terms of the metaphysical realm is that when we draw our contracts and we come into an incarnation, we don't just, again, I've said this, we don't just create beautiful stories for ourselves. There are pain-filled stories and experiences. There are struggles and challenges to overcome in our human lives. And just because we become aware of this, or we have an awakening or a spiritual experience, it doesn't make those things go away. It doesn't make our life necessarily any easier. It just helps us to understand it better. And from that perspective, that greater awareness and perspective, one could say maybe from the way God looks at it, or Source looks at it, or the higher realms look at it, that experience was written into your contract by you for a reason. And so when you see it from that perspective, that it's actually a point of learning, and hear me when I say that it doesn't mean that we are condoning the negative experiences. We're not condoning perpetrators. We're not condoning people who do nefarious and ugly and painful things to other humans. Not at all. And it's not okay. And it is painful in this 3D body. However, you can back up from that experience and you can see it from the greater awareness, the greater understanding, where in that realm and in that dimension, there aren't victims and perpetrators from that realm. Understand that there are two things happening at once. One of those things is that we are human, and we are having, in a polarized construct of good and evil, we are having good and bad things happen to us. But when you rise up into the higher dimensions, you can see it from the bigger perspective where there isn't polarity. And so you can understand, and this is what she was saying, you can look back on it and have redemption for everyone. And that opens up the space for forgiveness, which is a big deal for people, because sometimes it's difficult to get to the place of true forgiveness. So I thought that was a really neat concept. And then the third concept that she brought up during this interview is this idea, and this is fascinating, that time is fluid and the past can actually be changed. So what she said was, when this was happening, when her dad was taking 45 minutes to 90 minutes and holding her down essentially to long enough to continue to floss her teeth for this long, that she, in her mind's eye, she said, she pointed up here to her third eye, but in her imagination, in her mind's eye, she created a character. And this character was telling her, it's okay. It'll be okay. You're gonna be fine. This experience won't scar you for life. These are my words summarizing basically what she said, the gist of her discussion. And she said that this being, or this human construct that she had created, that she felt like she had imagined, said, not only are you going to be okay, you're going to thrive. And that was what kept her going and kept her able to not focus on what was happening to her in the moment, but to know that she was going to be okay. And so fast forward to her in adulthood, and she started, again, she found this tape and she started remembering what happened, and she went to therapy, and she was actually able to take her dad with her to the therapy sessions. And she said there's a type of therapy that they call time travel narrative therapy. Now, as a counselor, I don't work in a therapeutic session, I work in a school. And so I haven't heard of that particular modality of therapy. However, it really matches what we do in hypnotherapy or timeline therapy or some of the metaphysical modalities that we do. And here's what happens. And this is what she described in normal mainstream therapy, which is fascinating to me. She said that you actually envision yourself back at the age when the trauma occurred. And you, as your wise, compassionate adult self, you go back and you comfort that child who was having the experience of trauma. And you sit with that child and you give it all of the unconditional love, all of the safety and security that it may not have felt back then. And it actually changes, like she said, it can change what actually happened. It can change the past. So she said, at this point in time right now, she's not even sure if the therapy worked and she went back and actually was able to help the child, her child self, or whether she actually made up that person, that being. So it changes the memories that we have when we do this type of therapy, or when we take someone back in a spiritual hypnosis session. It can actually change the history point. It can change your memory of it and or the actual event that happened. So this is fascinating. Think about this from the Julia that was the child experiencing the trauma. And she's imagining this person, this character, this being that she thinks is in her imagination, comforting her, and not only comforting her, but telling her she's going to thrive, which she certainly has. And yet, here she is, 40 years in the future, sending herself back to do that. So is that what she experienced as a child? Was it herself from the future coming back to comfort her? It's just mind-boggling. And what's mind-boggling about it is we've had experiences like this in the modalities that Will and I have experienced, and other people that practice particularly spiritual hypnosis, past life regression, that sort of thing. We take clients back into the past to change those memories, those traumas, for healing. And yet, here it is in the mainstream. I had no idea that this type of therapy was in the mainstream. So this is so encouraging. And this is why I wanted to share it with you all, because it's encouraging to me that so much of this stuff is coming out in the mainstream right now. It's just miraculous and amazing because when you see the spiritual and metaphysical aspects merging with the scientific and the mainstream and coming together in that way, it gives legitimacy to the spiritual and metaphysical side of it. And it's what a lot of us practitioners have known all along. So I was super excited to share this with you. I just wanted to go over a couple of those concepts to let you know that, again, disclosure comes from within, so does awakening. And in the greater realms, we can overcome the victim and perpetrator narratives, and that time literally can be changed in the past moving forward. And so these concepts are important to internalize, and moving forward, I think it's going to make a big difference in humanity's healing and awakening and the way that we move forward in terms of disclosure and our own self-awareness and what's happening with our consciousness. So if you're interested in learning more, please pick up any of her books. Julia Mossbridge is her name. She has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, that's how you would say it. Pick up any of her books or listen to any of her amazing interviews. She goes into to great detail about all of her experiences and what it means for mankind. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.